Welcome, everyone, to the Main Street Business Inside podcast, kicking off season number 2 with our prediction show, which is going to be revolving around what can small business owners expect in 2024. I'm your host, Matt Wagner, Chief Program Officer at Main Street America. We're a nonprofit leading a collaborative movement dedicated to strengthening economies through place-based economic development and community preservation. Now, typically each week, you'll find me traveling around the country and taking a deep dive into the personal journeys of downtown and neighborhood commercial district business owners and their respective journeys. These are the stories that far too often are just frankly unnoticed or unheard. And so this week, as we kick off season 2, I'm actually running solo and building on something we launched about 3 years ago with a series of annual predictions, which cover the macroeconomic, technology, and societal trends that we believe impact our work in downtown and neighborhood commercial districts, and certainly the businesses we seek to nurture and support in the places in which we work. And so now, I will admit firsthand that making predictions is always a risky proposition. It takes a lot of humility in trying to better assess and looking that far out into the future as to what might happen. But we certainly think that these predictions can be valuable as just sparks to think ahead and plan around the likely issues and topics and shifts that we certainly anticipate will be impacting small businesses in our work this coming year. So why don't we go ahead and get started and move right into the predictions. Now, prediction number 1 is I'm anticipating that the dialogue that's been going on for the last few years around kind of this bricks versus clicks is going to be migrating over to really conversations around what's experiential and what's transactional when it comes to consumer spending. Now, over the past many years, this distinction between bricks and mortar and clicks, shall we say, is just getting far blurrier, and it's not really a competition at all. We've got physical stores, certainly in the Main Street network, that we are trying to push to have a digital component to their business. And there are stores that have been purely online, like take a Wayfair, for example, the big, global furniture company, and they're looking for various real estate plays within the market and moving from that pure online transaction. So it's not a competition, but frankly, a must-have. Now, Salesforce.com most recently came out with their own prediction that a bricks and clicks strategy will result in about a rate of growth that's 1.5 times that of having just strictly a bricks component or a clicks component only. And this year, as I mentioned, I see that that sort of transitioning, that conversation transitioning to really understanding how do we segment our products and our services between experience and what is purely transaction. So what I mean by that is the experiential sales typically involves sort of our sensory, our emotions, how we feel, or something that can speak to our lifestyle. And that can be being part of an actual event in store, to being able to watch something be made, or participate in that process yourself in helping to make it. But it's something that results in a story, a better sense of value, and something that speaks to who you are as a consumer. A transactional sale, on the other hand, is nothing even close to that. It's really convenience driven, and the product in and of itself is kind of the generic side, in that it doesn't mean a lot to you. And I'll just use a case in point. Most recently, I needed to replace the um, filter on my refrigerator. I certainly didn't need an experience in order to do that. You're looking at cost and convenience, and those are really the drivers behind that. That's transactional. So as we move into 2024, I certainly think that savvy Main Street businesses that position themselves should best, in that regard, should have both, an online component, but maybe that's more transactional in nature, and then we migrate and ensure that our in-store has a very experiential component. Now we can visualize this quite handily. So this is actually Walter's Flowers in El Dorado, Kansas, and on the screen on your with the in-store screen shot that you have here, you can quite see the difference in what is still their store, but the online component of their store here represented on the screen. The in-store version really blows your senses. I mean, it's just amazing. The in-store design, the smells, the sound, the ability to sort of stroll around, interact with the owner, interact with other customers. That's experience. And it really speaks to what you're there to sort of purchase, and it feels good, and you feel sort of unique as part of that transaction. On the other hand, a purely transactional sale is one that you see here represented by just a series of bouquets that you can buy with a title around them. It's very convenient. They're delivered straight to the person that you're either to yourself or to the person that you're providing the gift to. And same store, in some ways, the same product, but a totally different sort of motivation behind the sale, one being experiential, one being transaction. Prediction number two evolves around what we've been seeing in the marketplace, which is this decreasing average retail square footage, which I'm predicting will enable a number of existing businesses to turn into what we call in the place world a potential incubator, in fact. Now, the bricks and clicks evolution combined with massive enhancements to logistics and just-in-time, delivery of inventory, et cetera, has really resulted in less of a need for square footage, the whole concept of like web rooming, for example. And this is not to suggest that the overall number of retailers is diminishing in any way. In fact, it continues to increase over the last several years. There's a pipeline there of interested retail businesses opening, but certainly the demand for space is shrinking. Now, given that most Main Street businesses are in fixed buildings, it's very difficult to sort of subdivide and chop them up when there's really one storefront entrance per se. However, there is the ability, as you have some shrinking square footage needs, to be far more creative with how you build density and activity within that space. Now, one solution, of course, is to think of is what's my business model? And most businesses, for example, if you're in the retail, you sell retail, you have products. And if you're in the service business, you offer a service. Well, that too, sort of like prediction one, is getting much more blurrier, and successful businesses are finding ways to really have, if you're a retail business, for instance, like a bike store, incorporating services like bike repair totally makes sense. Or if you're a service like a salon or something along those lines, really building out a personal care product inventory is part of that experience. And so that's where we see a lot of potential for, if we've got shrinking square footage needs on either one of those sides, backfilling with either product, retail product, or creating another service element to create density and customer traffic within either one of those particular kinds of storefronts. The second solution is to really think about, and what you see here is, can you create sort of store in store concepts, whether that's in like sort of micro enterprises or sublet. There's even a great example in New Buffalo, Michigan, of a daytime operation that's a deli, and then a nighttime operation that becomes a speakeasy, all in the same space. So I think it's these creative ideas like you see here in Wyoming, where this is in Rock Springs, where we've got the Java peddler that has the espresso bar, and the bike and trike, inside the bike and trike, that's the bike store. And I think the cool thing here is that they're quite complementary to one another. I mean, you can imagine that if there's a group bike ride, that you might want to grab some coffee before or after. And so some synergies between the customers, but they still have their own consumers. And again, you build density and activity as a result. Now, as part of this prediction, I do have a sort of 5-year prediction flyer, if you want to call it that, that is small businesses begin to adopt, and this is going to take a while. That's why I call it 5 years out, and begin to adopt and incorporate predictive artificial intelligence or predictive AI around their customer needs. And that with predictive AI, they'll be in a much better element to understand future customer needs, customer inventory needs, product interest, and that will in turn get inventory control even more manageable and cut down on space, because you won't have to go to like a big show and buy lots of product in the spring or lots of product in the fall, especially if you're a seasonal retailer. And now you'll just be able to hone in a lot more on what those needs are and just order that particular product. So I think that will also accelerate sort of the space opportunities. Moving on to prediction number 3. No doubt we have a huge generational shift that is occurring right now. And I would suggest that that will and is making marketing choices even more complex for small business owners. Now, many of you may have been watching and seeing various headlines out there around this concept of peak 65 in 24, which is really alluding to the fact that this particular year, we'll see more 65-year-olds retire than in any other year in the past. And so that is definitely a transition point, not only for small business ownership in many ways, but also in terms of consumers, where as baby boomers enter that retirement age period, perhaps some spending will also, or spending choices will shift as a result. Now, just anecdotally, in my work and that of my colleagues out in the field, what we tend to find is that when you talk with small business owners about their marketing choices, there is a lot of embedded use of social media, especially around Facebook and Instagram, by way of example. But the world is changing rapidly, and it's with consumer segmentation as it is, there may be sort of choices that are better for some businesses over others relative to the type of social media that you're using, and the pathways to consumers. Unfortunately, that also means that you first have to understand and be much more sort of critical around the analysis of who is your consumer, because it's not everyone. I mean, I think we all sort of know that, but based on the current choices of either social media or the sort of breadth of outreach to consumers, I think we treat it as such. And so, given the clutter that's out there on social media, it sort of behooves us to get a lot more knowledgeable and more direct in terms of who our consumers are. Now, I'm not per saying that that's easy at all. It takes time and diligence to sort of collect that and better understand who's coming through the door, much more than just sort of anecdotally. And the choices are getting more complex as more platforms emerge beyond sort of Facebook and Instagram, of course. Now, if we just use an example of trying to understand customer segmentation relative to social media, you can see, for example, TikTok, which a lot of people are talking about right now, especially with younger generations, that their top demographic profile is the 18 to 24-year-olds. And if you were to look at Snapchat, it's even greater with that age group. About 34% of their segment is 18 to 24-year-olds. Whereas on the flip side, if you go to Facebook, the vast majority of baby boomers are focused on Facebook. And so, depending on who your market is, then that should drive some of your choices. But I think we sort of fall back to what we're used to and where our comfort is. Now, when we speak about direct to consumer, over the years, that has been through obviously social media, but I think a lot of small businesses have utilized things like, email marketing, direct having their e-newsletter or traditional media sources, advertising in the radio or on the radio, in the newspaper, maybe some on TV or billboards. There's lots of different ways to reach consumers, but I think for the new driver, that's really, I think, catching wind and has a lot of potential return on investment for small businesses is actually in the SMS world, the text world. According to Gartner, SMS boasts an open rate as high as 98% and a response rate as high as 45%. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, feedback is almost instantaneous. And as Google research sort of suggests as well, the average response time for an SMS message is between 15 and 20 minutes. This makes SMS like the the highest performing marketing strategy, especially sort of cost wise, for reaching your consumers much more directly, as you're not only asking for email addresses with your customers, but could you ask for telephone and would they opt in, of course, to receiving specials, sales opportunities, events that you're putting on, et cetera, via SMS. So it's a wonderful strategy. Now, I'm going to add a couple sub predictions here going forward. The first one is keep an eye out on WhatsApp. Okay. WhatsApp's popularity in the US is growing. It's steady. It's not like going off the charts, but I fully anticipate that this will accelerate. And here's the reason why. So, in 2019, WhatsApp was at about 68 million. Now, just keep in mind, WhatsApp is owned by a Meta. Okay. So Facebook, Meta. And that figure has grown to 85.8 million users in 2023. So pretty good acceleration there. Now, what's key is that the 18 to 34-year-olds are the highest using population demographic of WhatsApp. And WhatsApp, even more so, and I think more important to the conversation, is the dominant player when you look at like Latin America or Asian countries and their small businesses and the interface with their consumers. It's WhatsApp. And if you compare that to where here in the US, where is the majority of population growth? It's in our Latino and Asian American markets. And so, given that fact, there is a lot more opportunity to think about WhatsApp as another source of marketing and sales and outreach to consumers. So that's sort of sub prediction number one. And I'll take a flyer and do a sub prediction. Is that even a thing? And suggest that Pinterest is undervalued as a media. In some of the studies that Pinterest has done, I think are fascinating here. 8 out of 10 people say Pinterest is a place where they feel positive. And in a world of sort of dispersion and conflict and politics or what have you, Pinterest is kind of like a safe space. And I think as consumers that are reliant on trust, this becomes an important factor. And only 3 in 10 people say that social media, um, sorry, that 9 in 10 call it an online oasis. And only 3 of 10 actually say that about any other forms of social media. So it's a safe spot. And Pinterest actually currently drives 10 times higher branded searches off platform. And what that means is they consumers come to Pinterest again because it's a safe spot. So they don't necessarily have a brand. They're not there necessarily to shop per se, but they discover things on Pinterest and they leave then with a decision and a direction. I think that's a critical decision. They don't come to Pinterest with an idea in mind or a brand in mind, only an idea of what they're looking for or thinking about, and then they leave with either a brand or a decision. So it's a great, I think, opportunity, sort of a soft sell way to for people to discover who you are. And as a small business, that's a major asset to have. So be on the lookout for Pinterest and potentially using that more as your small business. Okay, prediction number 4. Um, I'm thinking there is going to be an explosion of AI utilization with Main Street businesses. Okay. And anyone that knows me probably, oh, no surprise, Matt's going to talk about AI. I wish I knew way more than I do, but I love the concept, and especially when it comes to how it can be used to really get into some of the issues that many small businesses have around time, resources, capacity. I think AI is a potential sort of partner in that effort. So throughout 2023, we saw artificial intelligence create massive headlines, as you can imagine. And global and large retailers are already beginning to focus and incorporate it to improve everything from their marketing to certainly supply chains. Now, I don't fully expect that for Main Street small businesses. However, I do think there's 2 primary ways that we can think about Main Street businesses adopting and using AI to help out their business. The first is more kind of as a personal assistant, if you want to think about that, sort of helping to craft like draft social media content or strategies for the business, sort of as a research tool. And then I think, secondly, to help with inventory planning and curating more personalized products for key customers as they opt in. Now, that's sort of the predictive side. So I think firsthand, early stage, we'll see it more as, again, like that sort of personal assistance, helping to draft things, or I need to do a job description. Help me. Here's what I'm looking for. Tell me how to write it up. What would you write? And as with any new technology, there's going to be early adopters for sure. And we've really got a great. We'll put in the down below for you in the comments section and in our show notes. But we recently did a segment with our digital coaches on AI as part of an overall series. And then if you're catching week 3 or episode 3 of season 2 of the Main Street Business Inside podcast, you don't want to miss Janet Hearn from Future Ready Consulting, who's joining me in that podcast to talk about AI in a much deeper than what we'll explore here in the prediction. All right, let's move on to prediction number 5. And what I'm seeing from a place perspective, so this is indirect to small businesses, but we are seeing, I think, growing intersectionality between what I like to think about as Main Street ecosystems or support systems for Main Street businesses, and the high propensity business ecosystems like a Silicon Valley or a Research Triangle. These are the support systems around, high tech businesses, manufacturing sectors, et cetera. So this growing kind of intersectionality, if you think about like a Venn diagram, where do they overlap? Now, um, it was only 7 years ago, I think back through the history of our work in ecosystems, that I went to my first eShip summit in Kansas City, that was hosted by the Kauffman Foundation. And it was really like awe-inspiring, like eye-opening and truly inspirational. But I remember wondering while I was there, like, where's the place conversation? Where does kind of place figure in to all these support systems and trying to grow the regional or statewide economies, et cetera? Now, fast forward, I think there's been great progress in this particular area, and this understanding of why place matters. And the Kauffman Foundation is one of our biggest supporters, and I can only applaud them in all they do to provide that support, and a champion that we have there, and Andy Stoll. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, taking this one step further, I'm predicting in 2024, we will see more attempts to sort of build greater synergies between these two systems. Okay. I think on one hand, there's been a lot of realization that hyperlocal, that place matters within systems. And now what I sense that we're doing is we're realizing that these high propensity business ecosystems are also highly dependent on place. Now, I think the reason for this is largely driven by changes in how we think about economic development and what is important for economic development. And what that really comes down to is largely human capital, and whether or not your community or region has the human capital that is necessary to drive these high propensity ecosystems. Now, given mobility of talent that can go anywhere, it's very tough to agglomerate like it used to be. And thus, there are many, many more communities in which place has an even greater bearing, and plays a greater role in trying to agglomerate that talent. And so the logical intersections of where we can come together, I think, are around a few areas that we can talk about. One is just in unique housing opportunities, whether that's in affordable housing, the availability, or like having cool loft style apartments or in old warehouse buildings or whatever. But that's where place and where downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts can flourish and be additive to these high propensity ecosystems. The second area is in third spaces, in places for what we call accidental collisions, whether it's the brewery, a library, a cafe, or even a barber shop. These are important spaces outside of work and outside of the home in which talent, human capital comes together, that is so necessary for ideas and innovation to occur in these high propensity business systems. Now, again, that typically happens in our downtowns, in our neighborhood commercial districts. Third is, where's the broadband? And oftentimes it's not out in sort of new greenfield, or it's much more expensive. It's already embedded largely, especially with some of the new infrastructure funding in our downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts. Professional services, of course, in different office buildings, or civic governance that you find typically concentrate in the heart of your community, your downtown, or in a neighborhood commercial district. Incubators, accelerators, shared food facilities, even co-work space. I was just in a great one called Union Hall in the Over the Rhine district in Cincinnati. Again, a neighborhood commercial district. I mean, these are places, they're not stuck out on the back 40 or in some sort of suburban office park. These places matter, and thus, if we invest in our Main Street ecosystems, we're also at the same time helping our high propensity business ecosystems. And then we've got culture and entertainment venues, the kinds of things that that bring activity to a place, that enliven it. And again, human capital is attracted to that. And then finally, I'll just say sort of like, creative office environments. Again, whether it's an adaptive reuse of an old building, a cool second floor loft where people are hanging out, but certainly creative spaces make for and help the creative process. Okay, last prediction here. Prediction number 6 is loneliness and isolation rise in terms of like how we think about what's called the age of dispersion. I really think that our third spaces evolve more than they have in what I'll call in-store micro communities. Okay, I could probably come up with a better title and name, but that's where I see the migration having with third spaces. What I mean by that is this age of dispersion where essentially you can do just about anything online, from get an education, work, build a career, to go see a doctor, like telemedicine, certainly shop, et cetera, that it's really resulted in a demise, or certainly a huge decrease in people feeling connected to anyone, or in some cases any place. And that sense of community that's so important to all of us as humans. We need those things. And so it's really imperative on our downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts, where those third spaces where people do tend to come together outside the home and work, to be able to do that. Now, some data to sort of support this transition. For decades, Americans reported spending about 6.5 hours a week with our friends. But between 2014 and 2019, it suddenly dropped by 37%. And I would suggest that that's only accelerated given the pandemic. In fact, one study found the rate of loneliness among young adults rose almost every year between 1976 and 2019. So it's not necessarily a new phenomena, but an ever increasing one as we've had more forms of technology. We've been able to perhaps move out further or what have you, where we're feeling more sort of disengaged and separated. And sadly, in 2019, a YouGov poll, 22% of millennials reported having no friends at all. And so this is a critical issue, not only for downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts and communities, but I think an opportunity for small businesses to play a role in terms of overall mental health, by being these micro communities that we can go to and enjoy. And this is just a wonderful example that you see here in Biddeford, Maine, which is the Elements Books, Coffee, and Beer location, where you can go there and in any one day or evening and be surrounded by people exploring books, having a cup of coffee, a beer, or a community night with a book reading that these becomes really special places in our communities. And this is where I see a lot of evolution, whether it's in our coffee houses or breweries or libraries, that continue to sort of expand through programming. And I think that's the key difference, is there's a programming element over the space. Okay, that's been the traditional third space sort of setup, is all about the space itself. But here with the in-store micro communities, I think we just see a huge amount of new programming, events, talks, et cetera, that small businesses begin to activate their own interior third spaces. So thanks so much. That sort of concludes the 6 predictions that I have for 2024. And I just want to thank you for watching the show, and certainly hope you enjoyed it. Now, over 2024, I'll continue to monitor my predictions and the underlying trends therein, taking opportunities to expand on those in other forms, and some blog writing and certainly we'll explore this more in the podcast, the Main Street Business Inside podcast. And so please continue to follow us. Add your comments in the comments section. Always interested to hear what folks thinks. Perhaps your own predictions for small businesses out there. And importantly, hit the subscribe button, of course, to the Main Street YouTube channel. And then run whenever you can over to wherever you catch your podcast. And I hope you'll subscribe to the Main Street Business Inside podcast. We'd love to have you. And hopefully you can share in the journey of America's downtown and neighborhood commercial districts, small businesses, and they're just amazing stories. Thank you.